All right, Guillermo Mash here for the KZFR Peace and Social Justice Show. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce to the program William Burnett, a member of the board of directors of one of my favorite and most recognizable human rights, civil rights activist groups in the United States, Picture the Homeless out of New York City. Welcome to the show, William.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. You guys do wonderful work, Sam, and you guys. It's just amazing. I follow you guys from afar. So I've got everyone excited about Picture the Homeless. Give us a little bit of the ditty for our listeners of what you guys do and some of the things you're working on right now in New York, William.
Well, Picture the Homeless is a grassroots organization that was founded and is led by homeless New Yorkers. We were founded in the late 90s after a young office worker was hit in the back of the head with a brick by a mentally ill person. And, at the time, the Commissioner Bratton, who was a commissioner in New York at the time, and Giuliani, who was mayor, together kind of scapegoated the homeless community in New York for that incident. And, so they put out their press releases, and they had the New York Post and other papers saying, get those crazies off the streets and everything. So they used it as a way to justify an aggressive crackdown on the homeless population. It turned out that the mentally ill person that did that wasn't even homeless. Even though he was mentally ill, he was living in the neighborhood, so housed in the neighborhood. But that happened, and as a result of several raids, night raids of shelters, a couple of folks that were in one of the men's shelter that was raided by the police at the time decided to fight back, both against the abuse of police power and against media stereotyping of the homeless. And Picture the Homeless was the fruit of that. Right now in New York, we've had the highest population of homeless, or the homeless population has been the highest it's been in many decades. Raw number-wise, our homeless population is much larger than it was during the Great Depression. Of course, that's raw number. That's not percentage-wise. Certainly much greater homeless population than had during the Great Depression. One of the biggest causes of that, of course, is the cost of housing in New York City. It keeps going up much faster than the income of people. So a lot of people are being priced out of their gentrifying neighborhoods. And of course, we had two back-to-back mayors, both Giuliani and Bloomberg, who were very intentional about doing that, allowing gentrification for a number of reasons, among them, of course, raising the tax base in New York City. But it's had a very detrimental effect on the ability of folks to live in the city. So we're pushing back. Fortunately, though not perfect, our current mayor is a lot more progressive on some issues, and so he's taken policy a different direction, both homeless policy and housing policy. The direction he's going isn't perfect, but at least it's nice that, a mayor gets it. And so he's actually employing the housing first model to try to redirect homeless folks into housing and make services available to homeless folks from housing. That's got its limitations, of course, because landlords and developers are in the business to make money, and so you're only going to have so many willing to take a risk and open up their housing to homeless people. We seem to be running out of, early on when the mayor started this, he found a number of housing units that would open themselves up to receiving the vouchers and homeless people in their house. But, now the city's saying that they're struggling to find new landlords to do that. So they've had to redirect and instead get landlords to open up rooms for homeless people. So you can see that stock of housing that the Blasio administration wants to rely on to make this program work is running out.
Yeah, I think the lack of building of public affordable housing is a nationwide problem. I think literally every city needs to be building. San Francisco mayor made a comment we can't build our way out of this issue. But I'm like, wait a minute, that's like so backwards. It's crazy. We're like so shy of housing. What would you say to that?
Well, there's two things. Yes, you can build out your way out of the issue. That means people have to pay taxes and have to be willing to let the new housing that's being built be affordable enough that people can afford to live in it, which of course would have a downward push on property values, I guess. The whole point of gentrifying neighborhoods is to bring property values up and return a profit for the developers and the landlords. So I can understand their hesitation. A lot of cities in the country have pursued, or there are a lot of organizations or groups in different cities throughout the country that have pursued what we call community land trusts and mutual housing associations. A number of years ago, Picture the Homeless had begun looking at those models for housing. And currently, we're formed with a number of different fabulous organizations here in New York City that we've come together and formed the Community Land Initiative, the New York City Community Land Initiative. that initiative, of course, has a pilot project in Harlem where we're actually in negotiation with the administration here in New York City to acquire city-owned property in East Harlem and have those put under a community land trust. And I know that sounds kind of vague, but a community land trust is effectively, it's a trust made up of interested individuals that's designed to keep property costs down, housing costs down. And so the idea of the trust is that the trust owns the land that any building would be on, and then there can be any number of approaches towards either there's already housing on that land or developers interested in putting housing on that land. The trust would own the land, and the trust would set the terms of the leasing of the land. The goal is then to say, all right, well, we're going to lease this land to you for X number of years, but in terms for that lease, here's how much you can pay for, or you can charge for housing, or how much profit you can turn around on it. Force whoever is providing whatever model of housing on that property to keep the property costs and the housing costs down, so that people can afford to live there for the long term, and take away the profit as the primary motive in managing housing on the property.
That's an excellent description of community land trust. I don't think enough people know enough about that. Neither do I. I mean, that was a really nice little 3-minute description. Thank you so much for that, William Burnett. William Burnett's from Picture with the Homeless, the board of directors. And why don't we just shift for the last couple of minutes to give the second theme of our show, William, was how is the media covering homelessness in New York, and what could they do better? What are they doing well?
Well, that's an important question for Picture the Homeless because, as I said in my intro with you, one of the primary purposes of our founding is to change media stereotypes of homeless people. And what I can say now is it's kind of a mixed bag. Of course, you have the New York Post. I don't know how many folks in California are familiar with the New York Post, but let's call it the National Enquirer of mainstream journalism, owned by Rupert Murdoch, same guy that owns Fox News. They still have their very narrow stereotyping of homeless people. And, just a couple of years ago, actually went through this long stream of publicly shaming homeless people for being out on the street and doing whatever survival things they need to do on the street. So you still have that problem. But then you have some other news media who, in the past would have taken like Giuliani or Bloomberg's press releases or police commissioner's press release and just go with that and play off on scapegoating homeless people for everything. Personally, I think as a result of a lot of the work we've done at Picture the Homeless is we've been able to bring some media over to listening to our side. And some of the media actually prefers to hear our side because they don't trust what they're hearing from the administration. So there's some positive developments, I think. And again, I'm going to take credit on behalf of Picture the Homeless for that because we worked very hard to get the media to listen to a different side. And the other thing is, there's a lot of journalists now who themselves realize that their own housing is approaching unaffordable, and they're seeing the skyrocketing homeless rate. So they know a lot of people that used to have housing don't have housing anymore. So they're beginning to look at it from a different perspective. And part of it is maybe it took you to get housing stress before you were able to empathize with someone else. I don't know. But it is changing slowly.
I appreciate you being so forthright about that because a lot of times people don't like to take credit for things, but I really appreciate the fact that you said you've been able to kind of shift the narrative and have them listening to the people that actually know the issue versus just taking press releases from elected officials. And that's really something I'm going to follow up on because that's an issue everywhere. William, I know you know that. I mean, San Francisco was really heartening. I mean, they were very, very... Paul Bowden, I've said this a few times, he called the whole blanket day of coverage media masturbation, but there's just a lot of angst. It's just a lot of, anger and how things have been covered. So I'm actually going to dig into that a little bit, maybe do some follow-up interviews and calls with you guys to, see what your strategy was because we need to do more of that.
Appreciate you inviting me on to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, wonderful to have you, William. Take care. Be safe.
Hey, you too. Thanks a lot.